Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cameras and Coffee, which is today sponsored by the coldest water. In today's video, we're going to talk about the Pentax K-3 Mark III, which was last week fully announced by Ricoh, and it's going to be shipping the end of April, the end of this month. So the article I'm going to base most of this video on is from PC Mag. It's called Pentax Lifts the Veil on the K-3 Mark III SLR. It's by Jim Fischer. There's a link in the video description. Okay, so basically, we're not going to go through the whole article. We're going to look at a few of the specs about the camera, and then we're going to try to read the tea leaves and think about what it is that Ricoh's thinking and what it could potentially mean for the trajectory of the Pentax brand. Long and short of it, if you just want to get the crib notes, I think it's a good move for Ricoh. I think it looks like an amazing camera, and I think it shows that Ricoh is interested in having a niche and profitable brand, and that's something that will help ensure that Pentax is around for a long time. They're clearly not going to be trying to sell the most cameras on the market, but it looks like they are definitely going to be focused on having a viable and profitable business that can sustain itself. Okay, so let's see. There are, of course, the standard comparisons here to SLR versus mirrorless and what some of the pluses and minuses are. Now, one of the really interesting things is that the rear screen on this, I think, is really worth noting. 1.6 million dots is a lot. And from every report I've read, it sounds like it's an incredibly sharp screen with really good resolution, but also it has touch functionality. And I think that is really important for the next generation of cameras. They do bemoan that it doesn't have a tilt out, and I would bemoan that it doesn't have a tilt out. But if the next K1 generation has a screen that's similar in sharpness, has touch functionality, and has the same flip out system of the current K1 cameras, I think that would be a really fantastic thing. And my hope is that Ricoh is using the K3 Mark III as a testing platform for some of the innovations that they're going to release into the next generation of full frame cameras. Camera manufacturing history would indicate that that tends to be the trend, so I'm optimistic that that's a safe bet. Some of the other specs are really good. They have 12 frames per second with focus lock for your frame rate, which is, for an SLR, exceptional. 101 focus points, 25 of which are cross focus, and a 307,000 pixel metering system. Okay, that's great. Let's talk about the metering system, because there's something really interesting going on here. And if another camera manufacturer is doing this, I'm not fully aware of it. So the article notes that the IR, an RGB IR, that's the 307,000 point metering system. That the IR stands for image recognition, not infrared. And the article states that Pentax is leveraging some machine learning to improve subject recognition. Okay, machine learning it's related to artificial intelligence. It's the manner in which AI systems learn. Okay, so what the article doesn't say, and what I haven't been able to find anywhere, is whether or not the machine learning algorithms are in the camera, or whether they're at supercomputers back at Ricoh, AI ML Central. And if they're in the camera, what it means is that the camera can learn from use what types of things the photographer wants it to focus on and the people who the photographer photographs most frequently. So someone who's buying this to photograph their family, for instance, or to do photographs for work, where they're going to be photographing their colleagues regularly, or for sports, really, honestly, this is not going to be a sports camera, but you get the point. If the machine learning algorithms are within the camera, then what it means is that the camera will adapt to you as a photographer and who you're photographing. I don't know that that's the case. I haven't been able to find out, like I said. if the machine learning algorithms are back at Ricoh AI ML Central, that means that the AI can be, the machine learning algorithms will learn from Ricoh inputting data into them, and that means that the autofocus performance on this camera can be improved by Ricoh's machine learning algorithms, and then firmware updates can include those improvements. I think that is equally interesting. Actually, I think that's better, because if the camera itself is learning what the photographer does, then all of that learning would be lost if the camera gets hard reset, like at a repair, or if somebody buys it on the used market. It would have all of that training that would then be lost and have to be redone by the new photographer. However, if the firmware updates are including that autofocus improvement that's developed by the machine learning algorithms, that means that that learning will always be preserved every time someone upgrades the firmware. I think that's fantastic. What that says is that Ricoh is interested and invested in this camera for the long term. It also says they're interested in and invested in their autofocus performance across all of their future cameras for the long term. Because if they're using machine learning to improve autofocus, then they're not just doing it for this one camera. That wouldn't make sense at all. They're going to apply that to every camera they release in the future. I think that's fantastic. I really do. That sort of improvement, that methodology of obtaining that improvement is the way of the future. Okay. The article points out some of the standard weaknesses that any Pentax camera is going to have. The live view autofocus is not as good as it is with mirrorless. Of course it's not. 4K recording. I've seen one clip of 4K recording from this camera. It was in Kai's review of this camera last week. I don't think that clip was long enough to in any way, shape, or form be conclusive about the camera's 4K performance. That said, I wouldn't hold out hopes that it's going to be a 4K video camera. This article notes that it doesn't have the software backing up the 4K capability to be a really serious 4K camera, and I am certain that that's correct. So video's always been a thing that the Pentax cameras lag way behind in. Whether or not they put 4K in as a sign that they are committed to advancing the video technology, or simply because the sensor can't really do 1080p, or there was no justification to scale back the capabilities that much, I couldn't tell you. But this does mean that if you are using this as your primary camera for like landscape work or studio work, and you do want to get some 4K video that you can convert to something like an Instagram post or even a YouTube video, that the camera can realistically do that. This is not a camera that's ever going to be used to do 4K video of a professional sporting event, and it's not intended to be. So that it can do 4K is very good and very exciting, and I'm very glad to see that. Will it be the be-all and end-all for 4K video? No, and it was never intended to be. So don't let the 4K detractions influence your decision to buy this. The Pentax cameras are still image cameras. That's their focus. They are designed to be amazing tools for people who love still image capture. And that is what they do exceedingly well. That's why I am a diehard Pentax fan and will always be a Pentax user for my still work. So the optical viewfinder has gotten more coverage than the specs on it are incredible, and I'm not going to belabor the point because enough other people have talked about the optical viewfinder that I don't need to. High ISO performance is unknown, goes up to 1.6 million. I think a lot of people make a big whoop over high ISO, and you don't need to. The purpose of having 1.6 million ISO is not so that you can use it. It's not so that you can shoot at f/5000 and a 1/4000th of a second shutter speed. It is not for making an ultra fast pinhole camera. That's not what high ISO is for. High ISO is used for things like low light conditions, especially astrophotography, to take a quick shot to verify your framing and your focus. You could do that at 200 ISO and wait 30 seconds to find out whether or not your shot is framed. But if it's not, then you're going to make adjustments, re-verify, a process which could take many, 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 many minutes, wasting valuable astrophotography time. So with an ISO like 1.6 million, you do a 2-second shot just to make sure that, you know, the distant mountains are in focus or the stars aren't blurry, and that your composition is correct. And that's what it's for. And then if you have to make 3 or 4 adjustments, you've done the entire thing, all of those adjustments, in the time that it would take to do one slow ISO test shot. Then once you're pretty happy, then you do your slow ISO test shot just to verify that everything's going to look correct, and then set your camera to run at the settings you had dialed in. High ISO that's its job. So it's not something that people are going to use on a regular basis just to obtain a super, super fast shutter speed. Memory card's a little bit disappointing in that one of them is not the UHS-2. Not a deal breaker, honestly, because the frame rate on this camera is not so high that it's not the end of, 12 frames per second. UHS-1 is still going to be suitable for most users. Then the article ends with a really good observation that, and I had the exact same thought reading about this camera, that it's a $2,000 camera. That is more than the K1 was when I bought it the day that the K1 was available for purchase. Granted, that was a few years ago, but if I recall correctly, the K1 Mark II was $1,800-ish, give or take, when it was released. So we're talking about $2,000 for an APS-C DSLR. Buy a heck of a lot of micro four thirds camera for that. You could buy a heck of a lot of mirrorless camera for $2,000. And that's $2,000 without a lens. In fact, there is no with lens option available for this camera at launch. Now, so what's that telling us? The price tells us that it is going to be a very high-end and very capable camera that uses very high-quality components. It also tells us that Ricoh understands they have a niche and they are going to make it profitable. And rather than being a budget brand that other people go to if they can't afford a Nikon or a Canon, they're going to make Pentax into a brand that becomes its own destination for users. And it's something they're going to be able to do because it looks very realistically like they will be the only optical viewfinder camera maker on the market in the very near term. So as we've said when we've talked about this camera and Ricoh in previous Cameras and Coffee videos, that's a good decision for Ricoh, good move on their part, and I think from a marketing, business, and profitability standpoint that it's the right decision. There will be people who want to have an optical viewfinder, I'm one of them, for their still work. So, it's one of the many reasons that I am a diehard Pentax user, because great quality cameras, great viewfinders. Pentax is always, going back to the 50s, had fantastic viewfinders, and that's supported by fantastic lenses. So $2,000 body only for a very high quality camera, quite honestly, is not a ludicrous number. It's high, but it's not ludicrous, even though this is admittedly an APS-C camera body. So at any rate, it does also say that Ricoh is focused on building the Pentax brand with existing users, especially APS-C DSLR enthusiasts who are looking to upgrade their now very old K5, K3, K3 Mark II cameras. So, overall, a really great looking camera on paper. Will I get to use one? I don't know. Will I buy one? No. Were I in the market for an amazing APS-C DSLR, I would buy one. This would be it. Were I in the market for an amazing APS-C camera, mirrorless or DSLR, this would be the camera I buy. This would be it. I'm not going to be in that market for a really long time, simply because I just don't shoot that much APS-C. My go-to cameras are the Sony a7S II, which I use for all of my videos, including this one that you're watching right now, and my Pentax K1, which I use for all of my stills. The only thing that I'm using my Pentax K3 for right now is as a backup to the K1, which it was a very good backup for when my K1 was off being repaired, and also for digitizing 35mm film negatives, because my macro bellows won't mount to the K1 because of the front of the K1's, the shape of it. That's it, and I'm not going to spend $2,000 to digitize film negatives when the K3 does a wonderful job of that. So, also the other thing is, as I look at growing this channel in the coming years, because the a7S II has been doing very well. It did great last year. It's going to last me through 2021. I'm sure. I'm optimistic. But at some point, I'm going to have to upgrade for my video. And quite honestly, I'll need to upgrade my video camera before I upgrade my stills camera. And this goes to an important question of, is Pentax making their cameras too good? I mean, my K3 still does an amazing job. It's what, 8 years old now, something like that? It is admittedly an ancient camera, and when I need it to do a thing, it does it perfectly. So Pentax cameras are amazing, and they will last you as long as you want them to. So, and as long as you take, relatively good care of them and aren't leaving them on top of your car when you pull out of a parking spot, or, putting them underwater or silly stuff like that, your Pentax camera is going to last you a really long time, and I can attest to that. My K7 still works beautifully. So at any rate, as my next camera is either going to be a Blackmagic 6K or a Sony Alpha 1, depending on whether or not I decide in 2022 to take this camera 6K, or this channel rather, 6K or 8K. And I honestly don't know which direction I'm going to go with that yet. But like I said, if I were in the market for a very high-end APS-C DSLR, I would already be on the wait list or have already ordered the K3 Mark III, because it is a stunning, stunning looking camera, and every Pentax camera I've used has made me happy, and I don't see any reason in this camera why it wouldn't do the same for its users. So that's what I'm looking at. That's what I would think is going on with this camera. It's an indication that DSLRs are here to stay with Ricoh, and maybe possibly only with Ricoh, and that Ricoh recognizes the value of having that niche that niche camera type for the users who want it. So good on them. I think they have a really good business approach with that, and I think they have a viable long-term product if they stick to their guns on that. Have a good day, everybody, and I will see you in the next Cameras and Coffee.